journalist. In a TV First, we reveal the cutting-edge technology now used by British police to join the dots and reveal new evidence in all homicide investigations.
I'm Tim Tate. I've been an investigative journalist for almost 50 years.
I'm Sam Robbins, and I'm a criminal intelligence analyst. For over 20 years, I've worked alongside detectives on major murder investigations.
Together in this new series, we are going to discover the fatal mistakes which prevented the perfect murder from ever being committed.
For almost 5 years, Carol Ray thought she had got away with a double murder. Her husband and disabled daughter died in a fire she had deliberately started at their council home in West Yorkshire. Carol posed as a victim and a hero, and she even got a commendation from the coroner at the inquest into her husband and daughter's death. But murder will always out. From start to finish, this is like a classical Greek tragedy.
Yes.
It's only going to end one way.
The benefit that we've got on this case is that we're able to look at it retrospectively. And what is quite telling here is the pattern of behaviour. So you're looking at triggers and then the acts of arson that Carol Ray undertakes.
At the time these crimes and these police investigations took place, was this sort of timeline analysis a thing?
Analysis in this country started to take off in the early 90s, really, and then it's grown from there. So we've now got the benefit of about 30 years worth of crime intelligence analysis as a profession and as a career.
Let's start with what we know about Carol Ray and her early life.
Yes. I think it's fair to say this is a fairly tragic tale from start to finish. So Carol was born Carol Stoker in Hartlepool in 1957.
Carol Ray was born to Linda and John Stoker. She was one of 7 children. She had an unremarkable childhood, but at the age of 11, her father started sexually abusing her.
That undoubtedly had an impact on her growing up. She was only 11 when that first happened. That would have been something which really would have impacted on her ability to interact with other people, particularly trusting men. And lots of cases we see like this often turn out to be quite tragic for the victim of these crimes. And it's not to excuse what she's done later on, but really it's something that will have impacted on her personality and her ability to grow as a person.
It's so important to understand the background of any offenders and any victims to see what's happened in their past that could have caused them to take the path that they've taken.
And sexual abuse beginning at the age of 11 is going to be a key trigger.
Yes, those are such formative years, aren't they? And when it's at the hands of someone that should be wholeheartedly trusted and is there to protect you, I can only imagine how traumatic that is.
Carol tries to get away from her father and her family.
She does.
She ran away and made her way to the Halifax area and got herself a job. There she met Richard Ray. Carol's relationship with Richard was a sort of childhood sweetheart thing. She was infatuated with him. He was her supervisor at work. She stole him from another woman. She saw him as the love of her life.
She meets Richard, who goes on to become her husband. very early on in 1970, so she's 14 at that time, which is probably an effort to try and move away, because by 15 she's pregnant and has Mary, her first child, so in 1971.
Let's talk about her early married life. What sort of conditions is she living in?
Carol's second child, Sean, is born in 1973. And then in 1974, Amanda is born and she has physical disabilities. That's an incredibly difficult dynamic. You've already got 2 children. You now have a child that has got extra needs. You're not very well off. You've got a husband who is drinking quite heavily, and you've got a father that is abusing you. So in terms of her quality of life, it was traumatic and not very good at all.
The relationship deteriorated with his alcoholism, debt. He was terrible with money. But everybody thought he was a fun-loving person, happy-go-lucky. But Carol thought he was becoming evil and got them into debt, and he was unfaithful with other women.
But Richard Ray was not the only man in Carol's life or in her bed. Throughout the early years of her relationship with Richard Ray, even through the period where she gave birth twice to the couple's children, John Stoker continued sexually to abuse his daughter.
Now, when someone is abused at such a young age and so extensively, it creates often very problematic behaviours, both in childhood and in adult life as well. You are not able to deal with things in a typical way often. You don't have healthy coping mechanisms very often.
In 1977, Carol became pregnant with her father's child. She was forced to have an abortion to hide what he had been inflicting on her, and her life began spiraling ever further into depression and out of control. I mean, that's a perfect storm, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, something has to break, doesn't it? It's such a build-up of dealing with so much that something has to give.
How did Carol Ray's break happen?
The first incident that we can pinpoint is the abortion of the child that would have been her father's, and that's in 1977. So in December 1977, she sets fire to the family home.
She set fire to a lot of clothes in the house and caused a big fire. Nobody was injured and they all escaped, but they had to move from the house.
So what we often see with particularly females who've been abused by family members is they lack a sense of control in their lives, and sometimes they will resort to problem behaviours to try and get that attention, to get some control over things. And one of those sort of things that people often do is things like fire setting. And fire setting, particularly in arson, are often seen as types of crimes that will attract a lot of attention. It's very destructive, obviously, but also there will be fire engines and people and the whole kind of commotion that goes with it. And that, to the person who's trying to get that psychological input from the event, can be quite powerful.
Statistically, it's quite unusual for an arsonist to be female. And Carol was quite prolific in her fire setting, and this was usually as a reaction to particularly stressful periods in her life, or they occurred after an accumulation of particular stresses.
So we know from your timeline that December 1977,
Yes.
that's the first time that she starts a fire in response to
Yes.
trauma.
Was she trying to hurt people? Was she trying to hurt herself? It's certainly a trigger response pattern that we're seeing.
Carol Ray was an arsonist because she was an abused child, and because she continued to be an abused adult.
Richard and Carol marry. The children are taken into care. Richard then loses his job or becomes redundant, and that is causing him to drink heavily. So whether Carol is then thinking that she's about to become the victim of two abusive men, her father is still, abusing her. She's got all that abuse in her background, and then Carol's sister confides in her that she has been abused by her father, which Carol had no idea of up until that point.
Although Carol Ray tried to escape her dad and he tracked her down and he continued that abuse so significantly that she needed to have an abortion because he had actually impregnated her, it's not unusual that abuse would then trauma bond someone like Ray to her dad. When Ray actually finds out that her sister is being abused, also at the hands of her father, she isn't able to cope with this. She becomes almost jealous of that.
Carol loved her father because she actually said, for all he did, I loved him. And I think she wanted him to herself, not to her sister and everybody else.
While to people who haven't suffered that level of abuse, that would seem absolutely outrageous. It's this trauma bonding, and that happens when someone has been abused at such a young age and so significantly as well. That's where we see the fire starting as a response to being unable to cope with stress in a normal, healthy way.
In November 1980, Carol sets her second house fire, and this time there are 8 people, including herself, in the house.
She set fire to the clothes in the airing cupboard and caused a major fire, from which she went upstairs allegedly to warn her parents. The 3 brothers jumped out the bedroom window and got seriously injured with broken bones and that. She jumped out as well and broke her arm. The firemen who attended the scene said it was like a battlefield with them all laying round with injuries. The house became totally gutted, but everything else was saved. It was eventually, though it was held to be a bit suspicious, put down to an electrical fault.
In terms of forensic fire investigation, then there are 3 elements really: the cause of the fire, how it developed, and then potentially who was responsible. So when you're dealing with a case from the 1970s, when the fuel to start a fire was effectively our home furnishings, which could be ignited through very simple means of just holding a match, then it meant that the cause of fire was very often established to be the things that were available in the home. And the intent to start that fire suddenly becomes a very difficult prospect to investigate, because we know that people who smoked in their homes would potentially cause these fires inadvertently or just totally by accident. So of course, when that fire is started intentionally, it makes the investigation of intent very difficult indeed.
It seems to have been the answer to all the problems is if I want a new house, I'll burn the one down I'm in. If I'm in debt, I'll set fires and I'll get some money. Or if Richard wasn't behaving himself, that she could force him due to the fire to conform, to stop drinking.
I think what could be interesting in this particular case is that Carol is hospitalised for 4 weeks. So when you're in hospital, it's a lot more difficult for people to abuse you. You're being cared, you're warm, you're in a safe environment, people are actively taking care of you.
In her mind, this isn't just releasing the safety valve that she needs when the pressure builds up too much. It actually rewards her.
Yes.
So after this oasis of calm, she's thrown back in the maelstrom of her family life.
Yes, or Is this another reward that her children are returned to her? So that might be a double reinforcement in terms of the behaviours that you're then going to see going forward.
But the underlying problem is still there.
Yes. So November 1980 was the fire that caused her to be hospitalised, and you've got a 5-year build, so that's a long time. And on the 24th of September, Carol sets light to her family home, and this time it has fatal consequences.
Again, she became unhappy with where she was. Richard was drinking again heavily. In fact, he was regularly falling asleep downstairs drinking, though he got on well with the neighbours and they thought he was a nice person.
He would spend long periods of time unemployed. He had an issue with alcohol and would often drink away what little money they did have as a family, and she also tried to support 3 children within that environment as well. Her youngest child was a daughter who suffered quite significantly due to disabilities which she was born with. That was again an additional stressor for Ray within that family environment.
The night of Tuesday, September the 24th, 1985 was pretty much like any other night in that family's life. Richard got drunk on cider and passed out on the sofa. Carol put the children to bed.
She'd come to a stage where Richard's drinking that she couldn't live with it anymore in her mind. So he'd been out to a pub, he'd had a few drinks, and on the way back he'd met a neighbour, and they were both out actually walking the dogs. And the neighbour said he was in a good mood, there's nothing to it. But he went back home and then he continued drinking bottles of cider until he fell asleep, which had sort of become a practice. On those occasions, Carol couldn't manage to wake him up again. So on this night, she'd had enough. They were in debt and she was fed up of him drinking.
Her anger and her pain was bubbling up, and while her husband snored, she struck a match and carefully placed it on the arm of a chair. Very quickly, the living room went up in flames. The television exploded. The windows blew out. Carol's screams woke up her children. Mary, who was then 14, grabbed her brother, Sean, then aged 12, and dragged him to safety out the front door. Amanda, 11 years old, was so severely disabled that she wasn't able to escape.
Amanda was left in the house. Carol made no attempt to go back in and get Amanda or to help her husband out of the fire.
There was an eyewitness account and it said that Ray was just stood in the living room, motionless, looking out into the world, and it was only after a period of time that she then tried to escape.
Carol was standing inside the house as the flames were building up, and yet she did nothing. What does that indicate to you?
There are several schools of thought here, isn't there, or several lines of thought that you could go down. Was she waiting to be rescued? Was she waiting to die? Was she hoping that the fire wouldn't spread as much as it did? I think it's difficult to tell what her mindset was. She finally ready to go with the rest of the family and didn't want to be separated from them?
There's a couple of things which can be read from that potentially. That is someone who doesn't really have much consideration for any life around her, someone who is completely resigned to the fact that she's going to die and she has set this house on fire, and it almost in kind of a suicidal ideation. But then there's also the other side to that, where she doesn't relate setting the fire to causing harm, particularly to her children.
And the neighbours describe her as just walking about impassive, outside as if in a trance, and not really bothered about what was happening, until she noticed people were watching at her when she would start screaming, saying, "My children are in the house." The fire brigade came and found Richard dead, having died through inhalation of smoke, and Amanda was in the bedroom. She had 35% degree burns, and they resuscitated her at the scene, and she was taken to hospital.
12 days after Carol Ray set that fire, her daughter, Amanda, died.
Carol Ray causing a fire, which has ultimately led to the death of her own child, is incredibly shocking and incredibly sad. A parent's main job in their life is to look after their child, is to make them feel safe. And there's often more emphasis placed on this when it's a mother and a child, because of that historic maternal role.
In terms of forensic fire investigation, then it would have definitely been an observation-based investigation. So firefighters would have entered that property with the primary purpose of extinguishing any fire, and then beyond that would have then tried to establish the cause of that fire. Now, if the cause of that fire was a piece of furniture that had been ignited in the property, then it's very difficult to suddenly start to pick that apart from an accident versus something that was intentional and effectively started in order to commit murder.
She convinced everybody that he'd caused the fire by accidentally dropping a cigarette while drunk. At the inquest, she persisted with that story to the extent that the jury believed her and recorded an accidental verdict for the deaths. The coroner commended her for her actions in getting the other two children out, which in fact she hadn't.
What is interesting is that Carol then receives a commendation from the coroner.
So although her husband and her disabled daughter have been killed
Yes.
because of the fire she started,
Yes.
Carol is essentially treated as a hero.
Yes. So, we're going back to that positive reinforcement. She's come out and been rewarded for starting a fire. In terms of that positive reinforcement of behaviours, that's now the second time that you've started a fire and you've got something positive from it, despite the fact her husband and her child have died.
It's very likely that Ray got a release from starting the fires. She had no outlet for her anger, for her frustration, for her trauma. So often setting a fire would be akin to a release for her. However, when she was then praised for rescuing members of her family from one of the fires, that potentially would have given her a bit of a thrill, because she was suddenly seen as someone who was important, who was useful, someone who had a purpose in life, and someone who was needed as well.
She obviously was of the belief that nobody would catch her. Having gone through the coroners and got accidental death verdict, she thought she'd got away with it. In fact, committed a perfect murder.
And for the next 5 years, because it is, from what your chart shows, it is another 5 years between that fatal fire and the next one.
Yes.
Carol Ray essentially gets away with murder.
Yes, she does.
I mean, that is as close to a perfect murder,
Yes.
if you like, as you can imagine, isn't
Yes,
it?
yeah. And is rewarded for her efforts. Yeah, absolutely.
But all of the underlying familial problems, apart from her husband
Yes.
and disabled daughter,
Yes.
still exist.
They do.
Ray got away with the murders of her family members for many years. This may have been something which she felt haunted her because their deaths were never premeditated or it was never intentional to kill them. But she also was able to quite convincingly lie about the cause of the fires initially. So it might have been something that haunted her, but actually she also may have just tried to forget that this had happened and move on, particularly if it wasn't intentional and this fire starting came from a need for a release of trauma and stress.
By 1990, she, Mary and Sean were living in a new council house in Gargrave Close, Rastrick, just 6 miles from the scene of the fire which had killed her husband and daughter. She was living with another woman, a woman whom she'd taken in as a lodger who had a young daughter.
They had started a relationship. We could never get to the bottom of exactly what the relationship was.
Unfortunately, that lodger, Dawn Holroyd, had a boyfriend, and on the night of Wednesday, January the 24th, 1990, Dawn went out on a date with her boyfriend, leaving her infant daughter in Carol Ray's care.
And Carol thought, if I start a small fire, she'll come back home straight away. So she set fire to the curtains in the dining room. The fire got out of control, but she got the children out of the house that were there, and the fire brigade came.
In the aftermath of the fire, Ray explained that it was an accident, that it had potentially been caused by an electrical fault, and that was something which, in hindsight, was seen as quite unusual because she had obviously started the fire, but then was very calm and very calculated in the way that she described it as being an accident.
That fire, fortunately, no one died in.
No fatal consequences to that fire, no.
But it did have consequences.
Yes. By this point, the association between Carol Ray and house fires is starting to become evident.
One of the firemen who was there thought it suspicious that he'd been to her house on 3 occasions where there was a fire, and Carol Ray was always present. And he mentioned it to one of the uniformed police officers who was there, who reported the conversation to a Detective Constable Philip Jagger, who came to me with it and said, outline the circumstances and what the fire brigade believed was a deliberate fire in the house. I then asked Philip to do a full antecedent history on Carol Ray. The Halifax area was broken up into 3 areas, and she had moved between all 3, and the fires had been committed in those 3 areas. And of course, there were different fire stations that dealt with them. In effect, each time there was a fire, it was as if it was the first time that she had done it.
Because we didn't have the technology available to digitally link these situations together quickly, then it would provide that kind of distance and time that prevented the situations being linked immediately. But of course, once you start to put police work on top of that and forensic fire investigation and start to identify patterns in the way that the fires took place and the circumstances around those fires took place, then it starts to close that net really around Carol Ray.
We created a timeline of her offending. We spoke to as many of the people who lived near her at the time, especially the one where her husband died, and they'd all said that they'd raised concerns about that fire at the time, but nobody could prove anything. Some of them gave evidence at the coroner's call, but her previous fires were never known about or became evidence in that inquest.
A large part of investigation now is looking at patterns and themes of crime. So the data analysis around investigation is so much more sophisticated potentially than it would have been in the 1970s. We have databases available, we have linked computer systems that allow us to predict and identify patterns in crime. And so in this case, these fires are persistently happening on her watch, and of course now that would be flagged immediately as a pattern that would almost certainly require investigation.
At this point, the police arrested Carol Ray for the murder of her husband Richard and of her daughter Amanda, and for setting 3 other fires with intent to endanger life.
They interviewed her, but she didn't confess when she first came in. Unusually, but with Carol Ray, they had to interview the opposite way around. They had to start with the last offence, because we had clear evidence then that it wasn't an accident. So it was then talking to her about that, then introduce the other offences. And the more they talked about the one with the husband dying and the previous offences of arson at the parents' house when everybody got injured, she suddenly realised that she wasn't going to get away with it. So then she used the defence. It was all because her father had been committing incest with her and was still committing incest with her up to 2 years before she was arrested.
She has a story to tell, doesn't she, which she says explains why she starts fires.
Carol reveals the background of abuse that her and her sister have been subjected to, and as a result of that, John Stoker is arrested and he's charged with sexual assault.
We actually did arrest the father, and he served 10 years for incest.
It's difficult to know whether Ray meant to intentionally kill her family members, but she also continued to start fires at particular stressed points within her life. When she was finally arrested, she seemed almost pleased and relieved to be able to confess to the murders, so it suggests that it may have been playing on her mind for some time. But that's not to say that she felt gleeful that she had got away with murder. If she hadn't meant to cause such significant harm, she may have felt that this was almost now a cathartic release, being able to confess.
During the interview, she then started to talk about herself, actually in the third person. There was no real sign of a mental illness, any kind of delusional behaviour that would have explained that. And it's almost like she couldn't accept that she'd done it, but she was willing to talk about the crime and explain what had happened, but using a third person. We sometimes find these situations where people will talk about, I was there when the person died, but I wasn't responsible for the murder, but there was nobody else there either. And it's the kind of way of protecting themselves and protecting their own integrity, because they're not quite able to come to terms with what they've done.
It's difficult to comprehend how you could have looked at all of this, fire after fire after fire, 2 deaths, severe injuries.
Yes.
And then heard someone say, yeah, I did start the fires, but I didn't mean to. Yes. I mean, that's going to engender a fairly sceptical response, isn't it?
Yes, it absolutely would. And the minute you make the connection between the September 85 and the November 1980 fires, it automatically would have sent us back in time to look. And then if you see a 1977 fire where Carol is, you then start to see the pattern of behaviour.
She'd accepted what she'd done in her mind, and she felt justified. But now she was just looking for excuses why she did it, to try and mitigate the full effect of what it was and her criminality. But there's no doubt, when things didn't go her way, she saw her answer to it was to start a fire. That's what she did in every time when there was a crisis in her life.
Carol Ray essentially got away with murder for years. If her intention wasn't to kill certainly her daughter, then that is something which may have played on her mind for that entire time. She is someone who was very calm explaining that the fire was an accident initially, but then when she was later arrested, she seemed almost relieved to admit what she had done. So it's very likely that it might have played on her mind, particularly if it wasn't an intentional death for her daughter, at least.
So looking at the family association chart you drew up, at this point in 1990, her father is on remand for sexual abuse, her sister is recovering or dealing with trauma from sexual abuse, so is Carol, her husband is dead, her disabled daughter is dead. I mean, this is metaphorically a fire that's consuming this entire family, isn't it?
Yes, and all based in childhood trauma.
On the surface, it might be very easy to say that Ray had psychopathic behaviours. However, we need to remember the significant trauma that she had experienced throughout her life and the way that trauma manifests itself as people mature. This is not to excuse what she has done, but to explain why she has taken the quite unusual action of starting fires. She was incredibly let down by the first man who is supposed to protect her, and yet he was someone who essentially hunted her down when she fled and tried to escape him. And he continued to abuse her even into adulthood. So these are things that most people thankfully would never have to deal with and would never have to manage.
She is charged with murder.
She is.
And endangering life.
Yes.
And she offers a plea, doesn't she? She says, I won't plead guilty to murder, but I will plead guilty to manslaughter. And the police and the prosecutors won't accept that.
No.
They say, no, you're going to trial.
So by this time, the case would have been built. The investigation would have understood the pattern that had formed, and that actually Carol is the common denominator in all 4 fires. And manslaughter is a plea that is put forward for when somebody dies and it is in accidental circumstances.
There was no great premeditation.
There was no great premeditation. You look at 4 fires and you have to ask, were they planned? Not necessarily. They were a response to trigger, but you carried on doing it. And that 3rd fire killed your husband and your daughter, so you knew what the potential consequences were. Really, she knew at the 2nd fire how hurt people could become in house blazes, and she chooses to carry on that behaviour.
Carol Ray pleading guilty to manslaughter would save the substantial cost of a full trial and would spare witnesses from the trauma of having to relive what they had seen. But the police and prosecutors, to their credit, refused to do that. They said, no, Carol Ray, you deliberately set those fires. You did so knowing that people were in the house, and you were reckless at best as to whether they would survive. And so in December 1990, Carol Ray went on trial for murder. 2 counts of murder, 3 counts of arson.
She pleaded originally guilty to manslaughter, saying that she had set the fires but didn't intend to injure anybody. this wasn't acceptable to the prosecution or the police, and we persisted with a trial for murder. After the judge sent the jury out after his summing up, they deliberated for 3 hours. They came back with guilty verdicts on the murders. They didn't accept the manslaughters, and the judge said that it was the only outcome. He thought she was a danger to the public, and always would be, with the persistence of fires when she had a personal problem, and gave her 5 life sentences.
And he told her she was and would remain a danger to the public.
When Carol was sentenced, she showed no sign of remorse. She was impassive to the sentence, as if she knew what she'd done and she was accepting what was coming.
By the time Carol Ray emerges, if she ever does, she will be a pensioner.
It's very difficult to know what Ray's prospects for rehabilitation would be, because it would require significant therapy and significant work around the trauma that she has been exposed to throughout her life. She would have to do some significant work around unpicking all of that and dealing with those issues to get past all of that trauma, not least the trauma that would probably have come from the fact that she'd also killed her own child.
Is there a lesson you draw from this? Because there is for me.
It is really looking at trauma and the fatal effects that that can have on somebody, and trying to get interventions and supporting as early as you possibly can to stop those behaviours developing.
If you don't interrupt the cycle, if you don't investigate early, then you're going to be fishing bodies out of houses later on.
I think for here, you're talking about where should the intervention points have been and where should that support and social support have come from, to make sure that that social support isn't disruptive or destructive. So taking Carol's children away might not necessarily have been the right course of action and may have just added to that. And also looking at abuse and the effect that has, that early trauma is something that needs a lot more care and attention around it.
I remember this case because it's unusual that you find somebody who persistently sets fires with a view of changing her life. Normally people do it because they enjoy watching fires or they have a fascination for them, but hers was for a specific purpose. She was in debt, she didn't like a house, the council would rehouse her. She didn't like her husband, she can kill him. She didn't like a girlfriend who she was living with, going out with another man. I'll set a fire and she'll come home and stay with me. It was all to do with what she wanted, how she felt emotionally. And she put everything down to her father.
It's a case which could have been avoided. Carol Ray engaged with some very, very unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal with the trauma that she had experienced throughout her life. Had she have had more support, had she have had someone who cared for her, someone who didn't abuse her in the way that her own father did, then she might never have reached a point in her life where she set fires, and ultimately fires which were lethal. So I think what sticks in my mind is, although this is utterly horrific, there were several victims left behind in terms of Carol Ray's behaviour. It's also quite a tragic case because of the level of trauma and abuse that Carol Ray suffered. She went on then to cause significant harm to her own family members.
Ultimately, Carol Ray almost got away.
She did for 5 years. Yeah.
What stopped her getting away with it?
Her next offence.
Compulsion?
Undoubtedly.
What really struck me when I looked at this incredible timeline you drew up with all the key events was that right from there, right from that first moment where John Stoker went into his 11-year-old daughter's bedroom and raped her.
Yes.
That endpoint was always going to be the outcome, or
Yes.
something very similar.
Yeah. And the culpability.
And it's only when you see it laid out like that that it becomes crystal clear.
Yes.
During the investigation, it became clear that in 1985 she had committed the perfect murder. She had got away with it. She showed no remorse, and it took her 5 years for her criminality and her actions to come to light properly, and for her to be sentenced for the crime that she did commit 5 years earlier.